Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We finally got our block back from the machine shop and it's looking good in this gray finish we decided to go with, nice and shiny. At the machine shop, we had the cylinders honed and the deck surfaces all cleaned up, so everything should mate together real nicely when we get there. The bearings were all measured and spec'd for us to make sure we got the clearances just right. We also had the rotating assembly fully balanced and the crank polished. So everything should be good to go to put this lower end together. But before we get there, we want to start and finish the cooling system because that's unique for this build. So we're going to put the heads on this thing and show you guys what we're going to do with the coolant.
We have our heads on the block, we have our intake. So why are we doing this? Why are we redoing the cooling system on our engine? Here's a 4.6, this is how they came from the factory. And the problem with us is that this crossover pipe, which is how you get the coolant out of the engine, this is what's connected to the heads and the thermostat. This will not fit in our engine due to the design of the intake. And we knew that ahead of time, so it's not really a problem. We just found it's something we wanted to do anyways. So we've come up with a different solution, replacing the crossover pipe with essentially, we're calling this a coolant manifold. So this is our first iteration. We 3D printed it to test fitment. And this has essentially, it's going to be an aluminum block machined internally to flow the coolant. And we're just going to weld a bunch of AN bungs to get all our coolant to it. So the idea was to mount this somewhere here, use the original alternator mounts, because we're also moving the alternator out of here. So it was going to be mounted around here as high as possible to avoid any air entrapment. And when we did this, we realized two things. There's not enough room. So the problem is when we mount this here, there's not enough room to fit a -12 AN line from the front of the head to the back where the ports are. So, you know, we thought we were going to have enough room. We didn't. So another problem is that in order to use these adapters, these crossover pipe delete adapters, we were going to have to do, you know, fittings to convert them to AN lines. And it's a pretty big fitting. So as you can see, this would have never worked. So getting the lines from the front of the head to the back just wasn't going to cut it. So we're going to have to redesign this, make it a little smaller. We're going to have to move some of these ports to the front to have a more direct connection from the block to the head. Another reason why we had to do this is because, as you saw in previous videos, we actually blocked off the cooling passages in between the halves of the heads, right? So we have to cool the front and the back of the heads independently. So we have to use this adapter. They're blocked off from the factory, but we pulled off the freeze plugs, and we're going to use the same kind of fittings to feed coolant from here to the manifold. All right, well, here's the final revision of the coolant manifold. So we got everything sorted out, all the issues, all the clearance issues we had. Let me take this out and I'll walk you through the design changes and how we got this to work. All right, so we got everything laid out here. Let me walk you through all the changes we made. So the first issue we had was this stack up. Adapting that crossover pipe delete adapter to an AN line was too high of a fitting stack up, and we would have never been able to fit it between the intake and the heads. So what we decided to do is cut off the AN fitting and essentially get rid of all the adapters. So we're still using this seals to the head, and we put this on the lathe, opened this up a little bit to make sure we had a tight fit, and what we ended up with is this. So now if you come back here, if I put this on the head, you can see we're gonna make sure this is in the right orientation, we're gonna weld this directly to the adapter. And now we have a very compact, nice fitting. This is gonna go straight into the manifold in the back. Similar approach in the front, so we're doing this front and back. Now, another issue we had when we made the manifold this way, there was not enough lateral room to get, you know, the AN fitting on one side from the head, then put another AN fitting on the coolant and get a line in between. So what we decided to do is actually take this entire thing apart. So if you look at the way this is made, right, this is the inside of the AN line. This has an O-ring, which is how it seals. And then this goes in here, and there's a little pin that keeps it from coming out. What we did is grind this off, take the pin out, split up the AN line, and now what we have left is the inside of the AN line with the O-ring. And we're essentially building this into the manifold. So we're gonna mill a hole here with the right size so that's properly sealed. And this is gonna go directly into the block and it's gonna stay there. We have a revision here for the coolant temperature sensor. And we also have a bunk back here just in case we wanna keep our AC and heater. So we'll see if we do that, but we have a provision for it if we need it. So we have our aluminum block ready to go. So we're gonna set up the mill and start making some chips.
Alright, got these rear coolant passages done, the adapters. Just ended up grinding it to look smooth. You're either a good welder or you'll become a good grinder. That's what I'm learning, unfortunately. We're going to go ahead and probably make up the bracket next to work on the front ones. So I want to bolt this down so these are sitting properly, and then we could tack them in here and take them off and weld them. So let's get to it. And with that, we have the cooling system finished. We added a little spice by putting the BIY logo up here. You probably will never actually see it in the vehicle because the intake will cover it mostly, but the OGs will know where to look. So this is done. Let's walk through some of the key features on it. So we made the block the highest point in the system to make sure any air bubbles are pulled out and come out the upper radiator hose. We're going to have a cap on the upper radiator hose, so that's where we'll fill and vent any of the bubbles here. The stock one has a vent in the crossover tube, but we're not doing that. We also welded the bracket, so this was a separate piece. We welded to the main block. We took some liberties on taking material out just to make it look cooler. We still need to tap this for a coolant temperature sensor. We got these O-ringed into the block from the head, so that's where the coolant will come from the front. We used the thermostat housing from an aviator, and then we adapted this upper point to have a weld bung for the AN line. So coolant, this is called the bypass tube. So when the thermostat's closed, coolant could circulate through the heads and through this So we kept this. Some kits delete this bypass, but we're gonna leave this here to make sure any bubbles could get circulated out and allow coolant to flow while the thermostat's closed. We still need to leak check this system. We're probably gonna wait till we bolt the heads on and pressurize the whole system, make sure everything's good. So that's it for the cooling.
All right, so now that we're done with the cooling, we're gonna get started on the fun part. We have all our parts laid out. We're gonna start assembling the bottom ends. We're gonna get started by balancing our parts here. Like we said, we have our block back from the machine shop, so we're ready to gap our rings, balance the pistons, the rods. We've actually already gone ahead and weighed all our parts. We know our pistons are within 0.2 or 0.4 from lightest to heaviest, so we don't have to touch them. We got lucky there. All our pins are pretty much dead on, but we do have to balance the rods. So we weighed them just to check the weights. So we know we're, I think, about 3.5 grams between the lightest and the heaviest, so we have to remove some material. So we're actually going to get started on that now. We have our setup here. We're going to be balancing the small end and the large end. We're doing a little bit of a unconventional setup. You know, we could have gotten one of those fixtures that they sell, but it's like $300, and we don't build engines every day, so it really doesn't make any sense. So we're doing it a little bit of a different way. The important thing is that you can consistently have repeatable measurements from rod to rod over and over and over. If you have that, then your setup is good. So we're doing sort of a car corner balancing weight setup where we have a point measurement on the small end and the big end. And we're going to be using 2 scales. We have 2 available, so we're just doing that so we can save a little bit of time. We're going to take 6 measurements on each end just because these scales are not the most accurate. Then we're going to take the average and use that as our baseline. So we already know which of our rods is our lightest. We have this already assembled. So now all we have to do is measure all our other rods, figure out how much material we have to remove from each end, and get to it. All right, so we just finished balancing our rods. We got all our measurements. It took us quite some time, but took it slow. Got there all the way. So we were targeting 0.5 gram from lightest to heaviest at each end, so about 1 gram total from rod to rod. We got down to 1.3 grams. So we went a little over on the light one, but that's fine. It's really not a big deal. So now we're done balancing the rods, the pistons. The next step is going to be gapping the rings. So we're going to set everything up on the on our workbench there and get grinding.
All right, now that we finished balancing the rods, we're going to work on setting the ring gap. We got all 10 laid out here. We got Trom piston rings, 1 millimeter top ring, 1.2 millimeter second ring, and 2.8 millimeter oil control ring. We're going to be going for 18 thou on our first ring and 20 thou on the second ring. We got all our tools laid out here. We'll be using a hand filer to grind down the rings to size. We've already done one, so we know the setup works, and we're going to go ahead and continue working through the rest of them.
now we're done with gapping all the rings. Worked out pretty well, and I will say that our nail filer from
Performance Purple.
in Performance Purple, that's right, from Walmart worked out great. So top tip, if you don't have access to a jeweler's file, this is a cheap and very nice way to do it. So now we're done with this. We're gonna assemble the pistons, the rings, and the connecting rods, and then move on to the next big thing, which is main bearings and the crank.
Alright, we got our pistons and rods assembled, so now we're going to move on to putting the crank into the block. We got our crank, it's all polished and balanced for our rotating assembly back from the machine shop, so that's going to be ready to go in. We got the new ARP hardware, we're doing studs for the mains and then new side bolts. Got the lube. We got King racing bearings for the mains. So these are the tools we're going to be using. We're going to be torquing all the rod bolts and checking stretch on them because we want them on point. But first we're going to start with cleaning all the parts. So we're going to be using this HVAC AC system cleaner with mineral spirits to clean every hole. Alright, so we got all our stuff laid out to put in the bottom end together, measure the bearings. So we got everything measured by the machine shop, all the bearing clearances, but we just want to, for fun, check it with Plasti-gauge. So we've heard Plasti-gauge is not really accurate, so we want to see how close we could get to the numbers they got. So we're going to put all the lower end together with the bearings, torque it all to spec with the grease, and then Plasti-gauge and see what the results are, and then we're going to start assembling. Alright, so we finished measuring all the mains with the Plasti-gauge. Here's the numbers we got. Here's the numbers they measured. Seems consistently tighter than what was measured by the machine shop who did the machine work on the engine. So I think in the future for us, especially if we're building a high performance mower like this, I think we want to invest in a real gauge tool, a bore tool. I don't think we would use Plasti-gauge. Just because this is showing much tighter, which you'd rather be looser than tighter.
Yeah, you'd almost want to get your crank machined or ground if you're going to have these tight clearances.
Yeah, especially on a higher performance build like this. So, all right. So now that we're done playing with the Plasti-gauge, we're gonna take the crank back out, put the assembly lube on all the bearings, and put this thing back together for real this time. So our crank's in, spins good, everything's torqued. Our end play we just checked, perfect. So we're gonna go ahead and slap in the piston and rod assemblies. Yep, 5.1, 5.2, so that's good. All right, so that's the last rod. Let's get our marker. We try to get purple to match our performance purple nail file, but we couldn't find one, so instead we went with power pink. So let's mark the last bolts here. There's 1, 2. So the bottom end, it's all done.
How's she spin?
Flip this over, let's hear it spin. Look at those pistons all in there, that looks so good. Alright, let's spin this bad boy. It's 18, right?
Yeah.
Alright, this should spin smoothly. Ooh. I like that very, very much. You hear that noise? The noise of metal scraping on metal. The good kind of scraping. Oh yeah, that looks good. This is awesome. So, that is it for the bottom end, guys.
Right now hit 8,000 RPM.
Oh no, this wrench is not rated for 8,000 RPM. So that is it for this video. Bottom end is all complete. Everything worked out pretty well. It took us a little longer than expected, but we were just trying to make sure we got every single detail good. So we got a lot done in this video. So let's go ahead and head to our to-do list. All right, so let's head to the list here. So head cooling, fittings and lines. We got the cooling system all done, jack welded all the parts. That cooling manifold came out great, so we're gonna cross this out. It's all good. Let's see, still coils, alternator. Jack installed the freeze plugs on the block, so that's done. Still got gaskets to do. Drill, assemble. Oh, okay, this is a big one. Assemble bottom end. So that's done. Yep, check that out. Machine work, that's all done. Balance rotating assembly, that's all done. Assemble heads, we can't do that yet. Degree cams.
Camshafts for that.
Yep, we need camshafts for that. We did get the valve covers and timing cover cleaned up, but we still have to finish painting them, so we'll probably show that in the next video. No harness, no exhaust. Oh, thermostat mount, we got that done as well with the cooling. So that's all done. No bolts. Oh, got piston rings, that's all done. Good. And balance rods and pistons, that's all done too. So that's a lot of progress, honestly. We got a lot covered in this video. In the next video, we're probably going to tackle the fuel rails. We're going to tackle getting some coils, the alternator bracket, and we think we're going to want to start with the electrical harness because that's going to take a little bit of work. So that'll be the next video. This was a really big milestone for us. We've been working at this for the past 8 months. Having the rotating assembly done, it means we're that much closer to getting this thing started. So I hope you guys are excited. We know we are. Thank you guys for subscribing. You know, I think 2 videos ago, we got over 1,000 subs. So we really appreciate all the love, all the support. You know, it means a lot to us. It keeps us going. So thank you for subscribing. Thank you for liking. We really appreciate it. We try and go through all the comments and respond as much as we can. So thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.
In our part breakdown video, I said that we were supposed to have cams a while ago. They're currently cut and they're being sent off to Bullet Racing Cams. We're hoping to have the cams by the next video.
The lie detector test determined that was a lie.
We got screwed. We were working with a guy who told us that his shop could produce cams for us out in Montana. We don't want to mention any names or anything. We'll just say his name rhymes with Baron. We created the CAD for him, sent that all to him. We were in discussions for a while on producing camshafts. It got to the point where he told us the cams were out to be heat treated and we would get them in a couple weeks. It never happened. We followed up. And he pretty much told us it got lost in shipping, and once pushed to show proof, there was none. There was no shipping labels. There was no invoice with the heat treatment company.
No trace of these cams ever being produced.
So yeah, there was no trace of anything being produced. So once we pushed him more, it just fell apart. He pretty much gave up and said, "Oh, I can't do it because the guy who runs the lathe is sick this week." It just was bad, and unfortunately, we wasted 5 months with this guy thinking it was going to work out, and it didn't. Unfortunately, it didn't go anywhere. Since then, we've reached out to multiple shops, got quotes back, sent them prints, figured out a different kind of plan to get these cams made. And we finally have something. We got this.